Okay, welcome. I'm very happy to have with me today Christiana Idika, who has been a participant and presenter in the course of our Places of African Philosophies workshop. Welcome, Christiana.
Thank you, Jordan.
My first question I would like to ask, over the last few days, we have been discussing the topics of places of African philosophies, and your work, you're deeply concerned with the question of religion, religious education, missionary work. The church is central, of course, to all of these activities, but is it also a place of African philosophy? And if not, under what conditions do you think it could be?
That's a hard one because I have to approach it from multiple sides. First of all, actually, it is a place of African philosophy because it is a place of philosophy. So it should be a place of African philosophy. In Nigeria, where I'm coming from, the seminaries, mostly where the priests are trained, so historically, that is where philosophy started. So Western philosophy were taught in these major seminaries for a very long time. So I'm not a priest, I wouldn't say exactly when they started teaching African philosophy. But during my time in Nigeria, when I was doing my bachelor's in philosophy, I was taught mainly by priests. And we had about 3-4 priests who were teaching African philosophy then. I can remember Professor Konkwo, I can remember Professor Onyocha. I can also remember Ukuru, Professor George Ukuru, who was an African anthropology. And a good number of them who were actually giving us some tips in African philosophy. It wasn't its own discipline, it wasn't its own course, but they bring it in from time to time. So that was my first encounter with African philosophy. But it started in the seminaries where you see these priests, where they were trained. Most of them, after they traveled abroad and came back and taught that African philosophy should be part of what is taught in the class. So then, of course, as a missionary, I'm a sister, so I think my vocation is about mission. The church came into Nigeria through the missionary fathers, missionary sisters, and different parts of Nigeria, maybe across Africa. So the first encounter Africa had with Christianity is through these missionaries. And most of them were part of this process in the seminaries, like the Archbishop Hiri, who was then, yesterday, Father talked about him. He was the first bishop for the whole province in the southeast, eastern Nigeria. Mm-hmm. So in the seminaries, we have major seminaries such as Bigad Memorial Seminary, St. Joseph's Seminary, major seminaries actually, not minor seminaries. And these days we have also Catholic universities in Nigeria. As I was talking yesterday, I said we have an approximately 187 major seminaries across Africa, and probably approximately 87 universities, Catholic universities in Africa. So across Africa. In Nigeria, probably we have 2 major Catholic universities owned by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria. One is Veritas University in Abuja, and then SIWA, which is also the university that is responsible for West Africa, just like you have East African University and Central African Catholic University. Mm-hmm. So the church, I must admit, had played a heavy role in making some of these things possible and also giving room for that. But what does this really mean for African philosophy to have a place? Is it just that it appears as a discipline, or that the students are given the opportunity to learn African philosophy? For me, that is not enough. It must, because philosophy is an encounter. when the questioning mind encounters reality and able to reflect over that reality. Reality is like a question that we as human beings experience every day. So we ask questions. Why that? Why that? So that is for me the start off of philosophy. And it impacts on our lives. It impacts on our choices. It makes changes. It helps us to make changes. The history of Christianity in Africa is so messed up because of the colonial encounter that was happening at the same time the missionary activities were taking place in Africa. And then you might also know that the philosophy of education of the colonizers might have infiltrated into the educational activities of the missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that philosophy, if you call it African philosophy, it must have to encounter Christianity. And Christianity, I mean Christ, not because Christianity has been institutionalized. And because it has been institutionalized, although it never started in Europe, actually, the three Abrahamic religions started far away from European soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but right now what we have is a mixture of culture and faith. What we call Christianity is a mixture of culture and faith. So if at some point we can separate Christ from this whole structure and system and allow African philosophy to encounter it, not as African religion or philosophy of religion, which is a different thing, not as theology, African theology, but as African philosophy, which is something else. Of course, they meet together.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's religion, whether it's theology, all of them are engaging with the experience of the African peoples.
As I understood you, then, in your personal experience, it was the first contact were the priests in the seminaries who, by their own initiative, brought in topics of African philosophy. And you're saying that it doesn't go far enough; it needs to be brought outside. But that was the start. And bringing it outside of the church into the world, as you say, if the world is a question to be encountered philosophically. Looking at your publications, I can see a general theme of concern with equality, justice, and mutual recognition. Your PhD thesis dealt with the philosophical thought of John Rawls and Axel Honneth. And later you've also written specifically about mercy, a central value in Christianity. How have these philosophical and religious approaches to recognition informed your work on migration?
Wow, it's an interesting one. First of all, like I said at the beginning, I'm first a sister, I'm a woman, and I'm African. So these things play a very big role when you think of my work, what I do. Now, my sense of justice, which triggered my studies, writing my thesis, doctoral thesis in justice, and why I have to choose the authors that represents two major streams in Enlightenment philosophy. Think of Kant and also think of Hegel. So, whereas Axel Honneth represents that strand of Hegel, and John Rawls represented that strand of Kant. So I looked at their ideas of justice, and Axel Honneth appealed to me more, although Rawls had a lot also to say. So I have to use them to build up, because the question between the two of them is what is normative and what is not normative. So where people argue that recognition had a lot to do with feeling and psychology and all that, so it cannot make claim on objectivity. So one will ask, what is the normative status of recognition? So that was what I was trying to deal with, and why that had to do with justice. So when you bring these things, and my job in the mercy as also a strand of justice, people think that mercy is not justice, it is contra to justice. And that's what internormativity means. That means these norms interact at a particular interface, feeding each other, like people will talk of head and heart. So I argued in my doctoral thesis that the heart, like Pascal Blaise argued, the heart had a reason, which reason itself do not know. So when I get in touch with migrants, I mean, I was teaching migration. Up to now, I teach migration theories from a post-colonial perspective. So the whole idea is that the person standing before me is a human being. I recognize that. I recognize through my sense of justice that this person did not choose to be born there or there. This person did not choose to come from where there is war. This woman before me didn't choose to be a woman, to become an object of rape. This child standing before me, who is displeased as a consequence of war, did not choose that to be. So, and my sense of justice tells me this child, this woman, this young man needs justice. Okay, so, and within the migration context, what kind of policies can be offered? So we don't always look at law, legal justice. What did the system allow and what the system did not allow? We also have to look at specific individual cases. And that is where recognition comes in, because recognition is not all about recognizing everybody at the same time. It has to do with individuals. You need to look at the need, the care, when we talk about care ethic, this is also where it plays a role. So it has informed my work as somebody who is in migration issues, not just as a professional on the field, but as I teach in the class. Advantage is that I have the whole time interdisciplinary, studied interdisciplinary, and it makes my thoughts, my work comprehensive and integral.
Very nice. Speaking of teaching, our center, Philosophizing in a Globalized World, is conscious and critical of unequal power distributions within the field of philosophy. You, in your own life, have worked and studied in Nigeria, Costa Rica, and Germany. And based on your experiences in these different places, what steps do you see as the most important to addressing the unequal relationship in philosophical thought?
I'm not sure I understand the
question.
That's
also a very...
So can you come again with the question? So I know
I guess I would say,
what I'm answering.
I think I phrased it badly. To rephrase it, on the issue of addressing the unequal relationship in philosophical thought, what stood out to you in your experiences in different contexts and places, Nigeria, Costa Rica, and Germany? What do you see as an important step or something that you saw was really lacking in your opinion that should be addressed maybe first? Or
maybe I'll have to tell a story. I keep telling people, I will say this in German, I don't know how to formulate it in English, what I call Bildung zur Bewusstseinsänderung. So we have mindsets. So, and these mindsets, sometimes we think that the world starts with us and ends with us. So I've encountered people who have different kinds of mindsets. You call it in German Einstellung, which makes more sense than mindset. And then some that have not traveled out. So they grew up here, they socialized here, they exposed here. So whatever they get is from media. Okay, that's what, and in this sense are most times filtered, So unless you be on ground, you'll be able to understand that there is a world here. And this world is open to me. And I am open to that world. I think there is this, I've encountered also Europeans who are good, who are sure that the world doesn't end and start with them. But I think in terms of philosophy, what we witnessed here within this week, for me, is also incredible. But this is just University of Hildesheim. We have how many universities in Germany? You can imagine. And you have many gymnasiums, secondary schools. So it's a process of allowing the people, helping the society to re-socialize. I wrote an article sometime on de-learning, relearning, this learning in German, when I was talking about how we can de-learn, relearn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is what we need. At the level of philosophy, every society is built on philosophy. Philosophy as a discipline, philosophy as a social practice. Both of these levels need a relearning. What happened here this past week in Hildesheim should happen in other universities. Professors of philosophy should be involved in it. Not because they want to teach it or they have to teach it, but they need to incorporate it in what they are doing. As I traveled through these 3 continents, I have also taken a stand backward, coming from Africa. I've also known that what I think as an African in that little village of mine, the world is bigger. Maybe the stories I had weren't exactly as they are. The people I see weren't maybe exactly as they are. So my journey made me to open up to the world before me, and it has enriched my resources today. It has enriched my thinking. When I encounter people, I don't have to be prejudiced. I don't even have to think that this person, because I've seen Latin Americans that looks like Africans or that look like Americans. You know, a lot had happened in my life. And I guess in the level of philosophy in Europe, if people cannot travel across the world like myself, people can also be open, for a better world, academically and in terms of social practice of philosophy.
And that would bring me to the final question, which is perhaps it's the shortest, but also probably the most difficult. So feel free to give as long or short an answer as you would like. Mm-hmm. But apart from being a philosopher, you are also a nun, a woman, and an African in no particular order. How do these professions and identities interconnect for you?
Yes, that brings me to the issue of identity. Sometimes I actually ask myself, who are you? Who am I? So at each of these contexts, I live my life as a particular person. When I attend philosophical conferences, believe me, I don't stand there as a sister. I stand there as somebody in academics. And that's why when I make my arguments, I try to make it as professional as possible. So when I argue about God, I try to make it as professional as possible, but it doesn't affect my faith because I know what I believe in and I'm convinced of it. And to be honest, believing is an experience. It's not something you tell somebody about. It's an experience. I can tell you the experience, you are free to accept it or not, but it doesn't intersect with my professional work with people, whether in the social sphere or in the academic sphere. Being a woman and an African had also impacted also how I think, okay, and how I act, how I carry out my activities, my actions. So I think I don't have a split identity. All of them play together, depending on which context I am, So wherever I find myself, all these 4 I don't want to call it 4 personalities because it will be a personality disorder.
Yeah.
So, but I think all of them are unified. They are united. Sometimes I can be split. Mm-hmm. When I am confronted with a situation where I have to present myself as a nun, as a sister, but at the same time, you have to attend to somebody who is unbeliever, who wouldn't want you to, It's really hard on those contexts, but I try always to overcome it. I'll tell a story. One of my classes, when I was in Castle, I also, before I started my classes in Mainz, I tell students, who do you see when you look at me? So because I try to break the barrier. First, many people had problem. I represent an institution. So when people see me, they see that institution. You understand? And it can create a barrier, that we can't communicate properly. So I try to let people address me as Christiana in the first place, so you remove the sister. The moment you get used to calling me Christiana, you will not remember again. So we can now talk, respectfully. That's what I mean. So it depends where I find myself and what I do. But primarily, I'm a human being, I'm a woman, I'm a sister. And I'm very, very conscious of that. And whatever I do, whatever I touch, I try to carry it with that reverence for others, respect for them, imply that's the charisma of my congregation, the spirituality of my congregation. All of them will come at play then before my intellectual achievements or as an academics or something like that.
Thank you very much, Christiana.